I was thinking about it yesterday, Zach. We spent several weeks leading up to the draft talking about how odd it was that the team that is vying for the best record in the American League, and still, by the way, as we record this on Monday, despite their scuffles heading into the break, have the best record in the American League. It's so odd for that team in that position to have the number one overall pick. So I thought it was fitting that the week leading into the draft, they played more like a team that has the number one overall pick traditionally. It was nice of them to marry that in my brain so I could better understand it.
It'd be really strange if the NFL draft was held in November and then you had like the
Just week 9.
yeah, and the Ravens had the number one pick. Of course, in the NFL, you would draft somebody and then they'd help you the next day. Very strange. And not...
Is that not Travis Bazzana?
Maybe. Who knows? It's weird. I know like this isn't the first example of this happening because there are teams who stunk, had the number one pick, and then turned it around for the next season. But, I mean, all the things that had to go into place for the Guardians to be in this position, or just think about what, like, a year ago at this time, you know, it was a slog to the trade deadline. They deal Josh Bell. They had already cut Mike Zunino. They trade Aaron Savali, and it just looked bleak. You were selling yourself on the 22 season being real and the 23 season being a fluke and the young players coming back in 24 and being better. But who knew how this was going to play out? Well, it's played out well. You have the best record in the American League, even after a stinky week and just like a lackluster few weeks. And, oh, by the way, your 2% odds of landing the top pick, there were 8 teams with better odds than you, worked out. And so you landed the top pick. Your season's going great. You can trade for some players that can help you win a title in 2024, and then Travis Bazzana can help you win titles in 25 through 31. There you go. You just won the next 8 World Series.
Oh, if only it were that simple. But, it does impact this year, too, having the number one overall pick. As we've chronicled over the past several weeks, it does impact the trade deadline. You perhaps could be a little bit more aggressive knowing that you were going to add probably your top rated pick into the system yesterday, that was going to happen. So now you can operate with a little bit more of a aggressive mindset. If you want to deal one of those top prospects, if you're in a position to, which they should, then you can do that because you had the number one overall pick in the draft. It was built in. You knew that was coming.
Yeah. And also 3 of the top 48. I mean, that helps. So it's all of this stuff works in cohesively, right? Like it's all good. It's a lot of work for the front office. Boo-hoo. But it's...
I'm so sad for them.
Yeah.
So sad.
It's crazy to think, a year ago they made those trades. They weren't on site in Houston. They flew down the last day. It's all been well chronicled. And they had to, I think, play therapist for a lot of people on the team or coaching staff or whatever. And a lot of it was just frustration that had boiled over from a really disappointing first 4 months of the season last year. And you fast forward a year later and like they got to be on top of the world. They have the best of both worlds. They have like that. They're in the position every team, every contender covets where it's, you need some additions. You have the trade equity to make some deals, and it's the beginning of something, right? You have whatever you add, it can help you this year. You could add people who can help you next year and beyond. You can, this is the start of something, and that's when it's fun. It's not like the window's closing. We got to make one last ditch effort to try to get a player to put us over the top. No, this is like, you hope that you're good for the foreseeable future and you can add some talent here. And at the same time, you also have the number one pick. I mean, that just doesn't happen. The sport is designed or has been designed for a long time to not allow that to happen. And, maybe it'll happen more often now with the lottery, but they are the beneficiary, the first big beneficiary of this new setup. And I couldn't have worked more perfectly, like the timing of everything.
Well, let's get to it. We know Travis Bazzana is the top pick. And really, Zach, I think deep down we've all known for many weeks, in fact, maybe many months leading up to this. I had mentioned it, I think, in the Discord, and I had texted it to you. It seems like every draft, there is the number one guy, the guy that everybody believes months in advance is going to the team that has the number one pick. And then as the process unfolds, I don't know if it's a case of it's just boring for it to just continue to be the same guy overall, or if there's legitimacy to a team going through the due diligence and maybe considering different options and even floating that to sources. But it seems throughout the process, it always drifts away from that number one guy. And then what ends up happening? The number one pick comes in, and it's always that first guy that you thought many, many, many months ago. And it kind of played out that way in Bazzana.
Yeah, baseball is different because so much hinges on how you disperse your money. And I think they liked Bazzana all along, but you never know what the terms of the agreement are going to be until the end. You have to do all of your posturing, all of your negotiating before you make a final decision. And I think that's probably where the Weatherholt rumors came into play. And I think that's why Chris Antonetti even admitted they didn't know who the pick was going to be until a couple hours before the draft started. I think as a team, you're holding out. I mean, both sides, like it is a negotiation. The player is trying to get every dollar he can. The player also wants to be the number one pick. There's some pride there. And I think especially what it means for baseball in Australia is not an insignificant factor here. And for the team, you want to make sure you can get all the players you want to get and make them the offers that it will require to get them. So I think there was a lot of that going on, and it makes the baseball draft different than the others in that regard. So, I don't know if there was a universe where they couldn't agree to terms and they just went with Weatherholt. We'll never have to find out if that was the case. I'm glad it was Bazzana. I'm glad it was, we both said it, like, just take the best player. You're going to have an enormous draft pool. You don't know exactly who's going to be there at 36 and 48. And you have had the number one pick once, ever. And you have gone on record and said you hope you don't ever get it again because you want to be drafting 30th every year. So while you have this opportunity, just go get the best player. And with Bazzana, I feel like it always made sense. He is like there. If I wrote, like, if Chris Antonetti puts on a white coat, if he ditches the moisture wicking quarter zip and puts on a white lab coat and gets in there and he's a mad scientist mixing up his potion to create the dream player, isn't it a middle infielder with elite contact ability and an adept way of making swing decisions? Like, isn't that what he would concoct?
Yeah. Already showing a propensity to have pull air balls to the pull side. You want the guy that's tapping into the power by optimizing where he's hitting the fly balls as well. He's already doing that. A student of the game, too. I want to get into some quotes that I read that just made him the perfect choice. I think even going back to a conversation we had last week when you were talking about what this team is looking for, and beyond just the skills, they were also looking for the person, and the person that was willing to soak up information and maybe be a bit of a scientist themselves. Norman Osborn. I thought this quote was hilarious. Totality of ingredients. That is the least sexy way of saying that a guy's really good. He's a five-tool player. He has the totality of ingredients, is I believe what Antonetti said. I don't know if it was in a press release or whatever it was.
Is he talking about Bazzana or Rachel Ray? Stick around to find out.
That's exactly the way you phrased it. The ingredients, the totality of everything that he brings to the table. It really made him a perfect fit for, I think, what Cleveland likes and what they're having some success with here of late. Two questions came to my brain, though, and I want to put them to you. I know you don't know the answers to these. We've already alluded to them a little bit. The first one, how much of this smokescreen leading up to the draft impacted what the terms ultimately ended up being. In other words, we all could have made this choice several months ago, as we just said. It could have been Bazzana. But going through the process, whether it was Weatherholt or anybody else that they wanted to make anybody else think could go number one overall, how much of that did impact the eventual terms that they came to? Did they get a little bit more wiggle room because they went through that due diligence? And the second thing, and again, I know you don't have the answers to these. We may never know the answers to these. Was anyone else actually close enough on their board that if the bluff had been called, they were comfortable going with that player? And I had seen a lot of talk about Weatherholt being this guy that maybe would have accepted less. But we also don't know, was Weatherholt close enough? Would they have even made this choice in a different universe comfortable with him being the number one overall pick just in terms of his skills? Because what had taken him off the board was the fact that he wasn't on the field because he had hamstring injuries. But if you remove that, which you can't, but if you did, deep down skills-wise, was that guy good enough to be the number one overall pick? So if they had that bluff called, where would he have been on their draft board? Would it have been a significant downgrade? I'm very curious about both of those things.
Yeah, I am too, and I also think it's such a different position when you're picking first than anywhere else. Because you're dealing with, you're negotiating with all these players, yes, but then those other players are also hearing from other teams on, well, if you fall to 4, we would love to snatch you up and offer you this. And, if you're, so you have more of a say, I guess, in where you wind up in baseball than maybe the other sports. I mean, we've seen in other sports, players just flat out refuse to go to certain teams. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot here, and the question is, who do you believe, and when do you believe them? Like, if you're the Guardians, I mean, you could have come to an agreement with Bazzana in January if you really wanted, right? Like it's, but you have to let the negotiation stage play out, and at the same time, I feel like every team keeps their cards close to the vest, and you don't. And you still don't know, like, did anyone know that the Reds were going to take Burns number 2? A lot of people just thought it would be Condon or Bazzana, whoever the Guardians didn't take. And then they go and take Chase Burns. And then that throws off everything. And then, the Rockies end up with Condon. I don't know if they expected him to fall to that. Like, I have no idea. So it's really strange. It's been fascinating. I mean, I'm sure we've paid more attention to the draft than we ever did in a previous year. I don't know that we'll focus on it so much in future years. But it's been kind of eye-opening just watching a lot of this unfold and talking to people who are like, there's a reason why the Guardians were so tight-lipped about it. And it's because this thing wasn't over. like you have to exhaust every negotiation tactic you can, or every bit of scouting and strategizing and studying that you can do.
Yeah, I mean, we scoff, we joke about it. If that's your guy, go get that guy. But maybe you need to go through the process. One, I think you want to learn more about the individual as a person. How do they handle adversity or being told information they don't like? Going through the process, I think everything is information. So that's good. But in doing that, did that enable them later on to go get Doughty? Because of these chats that they, again, this is something we don't initially know.
Yeah.
We might not ever know based on the way this organization handles state secrets information. But perhaps in going through this process and making Bazzana ever feel like maybe he wouldn't be the number one overall pick unless he signed a very specific deal, a very specific number, not reaching up into the, $10.5 million or whatever the cap is for that pick. Maybe that enabled them to then lay out this path that we talked about. Go get that high school arm that you're coveting because you can offer more than a team that is in a similar position. And it seemed like that was a pretty, to be at 36 and getting a pitcher with the sort of talent that I've heard discussed in terms of Doughty, and we'll get to him more coming up in the show. I think the Guardians have to be looking at the top 2 picks in this draft and feeling like, could this have played out any better than what it just did? This is exactly what we drew up, I would imagine, and it played out precisely the way we would have wanted.
Yeah, and it's you think about before they landed the top pick, like they obviously knew who Bazzana was. He's at a powerhouse college program. They're scouting every college player anyway. But then they get the first pick and they limit their focus to about a dozen players initially, and obviously he was one of them. And it's interesting the timeline here because he went to the Cape Cod League last summer and he won MVP of the league and he was phenomenal. And that's when he first felt like, maybe I am one of the best players in the country. Maybe I could be one of the top picks. And that happens. That's also them when the Guardians are probably like, well, we're not getting that guy. At the time, even as their season was crumbling last summer, I don't think they expected to have the top pick. And then they get the top pick. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, we got to study this guy a little closer then. And he fits all their criteria. I mean, it's really remarkable. Like, that's why, I mean, you said it. It's like, well, of course it was him. It was the guy you thought it would have been at the beginning because he is a middle infielder. He's got all those traits that are really hard to teach, and he's added power on his own the last year or so, where he was more of a contact, maybe singles hitter early on. And you look at the walk rate, and it's insane. And so you know that the handling of the strike zone, the pitch recognition, the contact ability, all those things that work in concert for a Stephen Kwan, his buddy, fellow Oregon State product, are working for Bazzana. And obviously a middle infielder, really athletic. He checks every box for this team. So it's interesting how he never imagined being the first pick. Then he gets on everybody's radar. He's getting more attention from everybody about a year ago. And that would put him out of the Guardians' reach. And then he's back on their radar because they get the first pick. And the rest is history.
I want to hit you with a couple of quotes from a few articles that I read. And again, all of them really feel like they're closely tied to what you said last week about what this organization is seeking, not just in terms of talent, but also from the person. This one comes from Baseball America, and this one is in terms of talent. Bazzana has unmatched feel to hit. He has an uncanny feel for the barrel and routinely generates high-quality impact. Impact? He has comfortably above average power, including plus to the pull side, and has shown the ability to drive the baseball with authority to all fields. Isn't that like exactly what every player talked about in spring training? Impacting the ball, pull side power, getting those fly balls in the air to your pull side. That helps you if you don't have elite exit velocity, which his exit velocity numbers are perfectly fine, if not better than fine. So that already was a good starting point. But it seemed like what I just said to you is exactly as you said. Antonetti's been trying to cook up hitters in the lab. That is the sort of hitter that he was looking for.
And you asked, is it better to go with the higher floor or the higher ceiling last week? Doesn't this guy have the best of both worlds there? Seems like the floor is pretty high because of those inherent qualities where the on-base percentage is going to be there no matter what. And you're just hoping he develops 25 home run power instead of 15 maybe?
Yeah, I was listening back to last week as I was editing, and I realized I sort of sold him short. I made it sound like, oh, well, he's just the safe pick without much ceiling. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think he's shown that not only are the skills good, but he has an insatiable drive to get better and to soak up information. And that comes from this next quote. It was in the MLB.com article, and I felt like this one had to be forwarded from the desk of the agent to the Guardians, knowing what we've talked about, what the Guardians prioritize. Beyond the sheer numbers, what makes Bazzana the most interesting man in college baseball, according to his agent, Chase Brewer, is his analytical mindset. For example, during his first year at OSU, he conducted research that showed that his chase rate was significantly higher in hitter-friendly counts, leading to his OBP jumping from 423 as a freshman to 500 as a sophomore. In 2023, this one was the kicker that just knocked me out of my seat. They could have just said this and the Guardians would have picked him immediately. Bazzana delivered a 90-minute presentation to Oregon State's pitchers on what pitches they should be throwing in certain situations.
It would be
He's
great
doing the presentations.
if both of those were for a class. Like there was some class assignment and he just was able to finagle an angle that would benefit him and the Oregon State team while also satisfying the requirements of the class. Yeah. So that's what I think we should dive into. That element is what I wrote about today because all the hitting tools are there. But it's the Guardians, a lot of teams have done this, like the Astros. I don't even know if they have a scouting department anymore. Teams rely a lot more, and it started around the pandemic, on video and the data because every college program is equipped with all the cameras that can spit out all the metrics that you need, and so you can do a lot of scouting that way, and you can never see a player and still know a lot about them. But the one thing you can't know is what's inside. That what is going to drive that player? How are they going to handle adversity? What is their work ethic like? Are they willing to embrace instruction and coaching and information? When Matt Blake approached Shane Bieber in Double-A in 2017 and said, look, you need to change up. It would really benefit you. It would play well off of your other pitches. And when you get to the major leagues, it's going to be so beneficial if you have a changeup you can rely on. Now, we know it took until 2024 when Bieber's elbow was falling off to finally perfect that changeup. But Shane could have said, look, hey, man, I appreciate you. Known you for a few years. You're a good dude, but you see my ERA? Like, this is easy. I'm in Double-A in the Eastern League, and, like, I'm breezing through it. Nobody can touch my stuff. Why would I mess with a changeup now and potentially screw up my numbers, and then they're not going to want to promote me to Triple-A? No, he was like, okay, sounds good. I trust you. And if you can explain to me the why, which Matt Blake did, then it's easier for me to embrace this recommendation and this coaching. They're looking for that. You know, Tanner Bybee will tell you that his college career did not go the way he wanted it to. Cal State Fullerton basically won like the College World Series every single year forever. And then he got there and he was the ace and they had a down year and it was frustrating for him. And he had okay stuff. Wasn't great. But why did he go in the 5th round? Because the Guardians looked at him and they saw, I mean, you see it. When Stephen Vogt wants to take him out of a game, he looks like someone just killed his puppy. Like he wants to be out there. He's a bulldog. And they saw that drive in him. And he was so willing to embrace the coaching and partner with the Guardians people. And that's what led him to the majors where he's thriving. So you're looking for that makeup. And the Guardians will tell you that is priority number 1 for all of their scouts. They can get video on every single Bazzana at bat since he was playing 6U T-ball at the age of 3 in Sydney, Australia. But what they can't get from video or from the metrics is when he goes through an 0 for 15 and he uncharacteristically starts chasing pitches out of the zone, is he going to be the type of guy who goes and meets with the hitting coach and studies video and listens to a suggestion on a tweak to make in his swing or his stance that could help him? You just read examples of like, he doesn't need, screw the coach, I'll just do it myself. Like he's so invested in understanding the why. He even said it. He said he wants to know not just that the greatest athletes are really great at what they do, but why are they great? What makes them great? What can he do to be on their level? And why does it work? And why do certain things not work? He said he always wants to have that edge. And so it's one thing to have all the talent. It's one thing to have the contact ability. It's one thing to have an elite chase rate. What he has taken it upon himself to do is to understand how to get those things, why he's able to do those things that other people aren't. And then the Guardians, they see that and they're like, okay, well, then clearly this guy wants to be the best that he can be. He wants to get the most out of his talent, and he's already got all these elite traits that are really hard to teach anyway. So if there are things we can teach him to help him get better, he'll embrace that. He'll accept that. And that's why it's the perfect match, really. And, that's not to say, like, we don't know. Nobody knows. Scouting directors don't know. Like, there's a reason why the draft is still largely a crapshoot, but he does have the totality of ingredients to be exactly who the Guardians need.
I think the toughest thing about a draft is you're picking from the best players in a college or high school pool where they just were so much better than their peers. And now they're going to be going to a level where they're going to be on the same footing. And then maybe they emerge to be better than a lot of their peers at the next level, but it's going to take some time. And as we've been discussing, not just with him, but with all young players, sometimes the most important thing is learning how a player deals with failure. But it's not even just how they compartmentalize that, as Stephen Kwan has talked so much about. It's also about what does, and this is, I don't want to say it's a concern, but it's something that I would need to know more of. When I see a player that is seeking out information and is going to be making adjustments, are they a tinkerer? Are they someone that maybe can have paralysis by that analysis and get themselves into a position where they're making too many adjustments? And the thing is, you can't ever really know when a player is slashing 407, 568, 911 at the collegiate level. You're probably not making too many adjustments because things are going pretty good when you have twice as many walks to strikeouts or your 28 bombs. But that's where you really have to dig in. And yes, we rely a lot on data, and data can get you about 80% of the way there, I think. But you need that extra 20% to help bridge the gap. And that's where still having feet on the ground and having conversations and learning how a guy is going to deal with that failure, not just from a mental standpoint, but also how are you going to make the adjustments? Are you going to be willing to stick with something even if it doesn't feel like it's working right now, but we're seeing signs? Stuff that you just can't know. But it seems like, based on everything that we can know today, Travis Bazzana is in a pretty good position to handle all that kind of stuff.
You don't golf, so you won't get this, but
I used to, but we're done.
I have a new putter. It's a nice putter. Very different grip. And I'm really struggling to adapt. And I know at the end of the tunnel, there's going to be some good putting in my future. But it's tough to gut through right now. And you hear players all the time say, just got to stick with the plan. Got to stay with my approach. All those things you're saying. And it's sometimes you have to make those tweaks or you have to make those additions to your arsenal and go through some rough times as you figure it out and understand it. And you have to trust that it's going to work out in the end. That's what I mean, where you're trusting your coaches who you hope know best and know what will ultimately work. But there are going to be some tougher days in there. I've had some 3-putts where I would love to just go back in my bag and get my old putter and sink it in 1 or 2. But you have to stick with it. And eventually it'll pay off. And I think that's what makes the best coaches is having a player who will trust you. I think that's what makes Carl Willis so good. I know that's what made Ruben Niebla really good. Those pitchers would come up through the system. He was a coordinator, so he could see them all the way through. And level by level, he's making recommendations either to the pitchers or to their coaches at each affiliate and saying, hey, try this. I think it would work. Here's why. Here's what this could look like eventually. Here's the payoff in the end if you get it right. And the players who trust that coaching, who trust that input, who are willing to learn and embrace and work hard at it. Remember when Aaron Savali, at the end of a season, I think it was after 2020, like a week later, he and Ruben Niebla had a phone call, and it was like, hey, let's completely revamp your mechanics. And I think for the first few weeks, he was like only throwing a football. And then he came back with that new delivery, and like the arm action was a lot shorter. And he was having his best season, and then he got injured. Like I think he would have been an all-star. Like that's a huge gamble to take if you're Savali. You're already in the majors, and you're willing to just completely overhaul the delivery that you've known since you were a kid, and you're putting all your faith and all your trust in Ruben Niebla. But that's what makes the best coaches. And the Guardians will tell you that's what makes the best players, is when you have that work ethic. Savali put in so much work that offseason to refine the mechanics, to make sure that he was as comfortable as possible with them once he got to spring training and it was go time. So when you get that pairing, that's when you can make magic. And with Bazzana, it seems like that's a kid who's going to do absolutely whatever it takes to be the best player he could possibly be.
Bazzana may be talented, but he's got nothing on Zach Meisel's ability to take a show about draft and excitement and turn it into a golf conversation about his swing and his putts. That was uncanny, dude.
Can we talk about my 4 chip-ins this year? More than I had in my life combined.
We'll do that. We'll do that after the show. That'll be the special bonus for everyone that wants to stick around. I'll tell you where that link is. Never. The most important question now, I think everyone's going to want to know, is where's he going? What's the plan for him the rest of this year? It seems like maybe 25 could be on the board for him to make a debut in the majors at some point. But what about this year? It's not even just about seeing pitching, but I think they would want to get him with the best coordinators, the best coaches, to really, again, sink into what makes him him, get to know him, and then he gets to know them to help start building those relationships that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would guess Lake County for like 5 minutes. And then Akron. I don't know, But, and like this isn't a perfect comparison, but they drafted DeLotter in 22. In 23, he started at Lake County and then went to Akron. I don't know. This is a number 1 pick. Maybe it's a little different. Oregon State, better competition, I guess. So maybe he'd start at Akron. Whatever. I think he ends up at Akron by the end of the year, and then it's probably a big league camp invite in the spring. It starts in Columbus.
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Right? Starts in Columbus, and then
I don't know. See, I think
goes back to Akron for a couple weeks.
I think there's belief that it's a difficult way to phrase it. I don't want to say better competition, but there's more unique competition at AA because you often see a lot of the best prospects stick around in AA for a long time, and then when you get to AAA, yeah, you do have some top prospects down there, but you also have some guys that have failed at the major league level and are hanging on. They're 28, 29, 30. It's a different crop of players. If you're actually looking for their peers, you're probably going to find more of them at AA, and AAA could be maybe a shorter stop. But the other thing that I was thinking, Zach, and this is what the organization has to think about too, how important is just seeing minor league pitching for him this year, and how important is that other stuff that we're talking about? Maybe digging in on the relationships and swing mechanics and just positioning him to be ready to hit the ground running in 25 so that maybe he can ascend to the major league level.
That's where I think the big league camp invite is huge. He is in front of the major league coaches. He is also, like, he even said it, like, it's a little underrated factor here of just him having a relationship with Stephen Kwan, having someone he knows can show him the ropes in the organization, show him how to be a major leaguer. That'll help in the spring. And we're making assumptions here. I would think he'd get a spring training, but it's really weird how this organization has flipped. I'm not writing off the pitching factory by any means. I think we lose sight of the fact that like what Bybee and Williams and Logan Allen did last year is really impressive. And to get 3 guys kind of come in and rescue your rotation is amazing, especially since like I don't think they wanted to call up Bybee as soon as they did last year, and They were sort of forced into it, and he never looked back. So just because this year hasn't had the same fruits doesn't mean that the pitching factory is dead. I do think, the Espino injury really hurts, and there's going to be a gap sometimes between waves of talent. More, though, I wanted to just point out the fact that you've got Bazzana, who I think the timetable would be sometime in 2025, right? As long as everything goes well. And oh, by the way, like Chase DeLotter also would be on that timetable. And oh, by the way, Kyle Manzardo is still there for you. I mean, those could be 3 middle of the order hitters or top of the order hitters who you're just ready to add to your lineup at some point in over the next, obviously Manzardo having had a taste of the major leagues already. And I would expect to see him at some point in the second half here. But like adding all those guys at some point here, like that's a heck of a lot of talent. I mean, those are two in DeLotter and Bazzana, two top 25 picks or prospects. Not to mention like Juan Brito, who's waiting there for an opportunity, and you've started to see Angel Martinez, and what's Jose Tena doing? Like, there's so much position player talent, and so it's going to be fun in the spring to see how it plays out and what those competitions look like. And also the fact that like they want Bazzana, they want him to, I think, claim the second base job at some point. They're going to start him at second base. Antonetti said he's got the athleticism to shift somewhere else if need be, but even though he's more advanced as a hitter than a fielder, like they don't have doubts that he could be a fine second baseman. Well, what does that mean for Rocchio? And what does that mean for Martinez and Tena and everybody else? So there's a lot to sort through there, and it'll be interesting. I think part of that dictates to what level Bazzana plays at, because you want to make sure everybody is getting playing time. Is he going to bounce around like the other guys do? It almost feels like a prerequisite in this organization. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. But I think what's exciting is that this isn't like a, how do you get him here by 2028? This is a, how do you get him here by June?
I want you to put on your prediction cap.
Oh, boy.
We won't hold you to this, though I probably will cut it and save it. When does he make his big league debut? Give me a month and a year.
It's really interesting because a lot of times we say, like, what has to happen for X? Remember we were talking in the spring, what has to happen for Juan Brito to be the second baseman? And big part of that was, well, how do you get Andres Jimenez over to short? And it was tricky because you needed Rocchio to falter, Arias to falter. Some of those things have happened. What we didn't anticipate was Martinez and Tena kind of jumping the line. And Daniel Schneemann, by the way. With Bazzana, it's less about the other people because he's the first pick and he's going to be your top prospect. So he dictates a lot of this. But there is still, is Jimenez just going to be the shortstop on day one next year? Is he cool with that? Are you willing to just make that declaration immediately knowing Bazzana's going to play second?
Well, if you know that Bazzana is going to be your future second baseman, and I guess you can't know, but if you know that he's going to be your second baseman, don't you have to make that move?
Yeah.
Doesn't Jimenez have to shift to shortstop? You can't be doing that in the middle of the year, another year into Jimenez's career. You have to give him an offseason to get into playing shortstop again, get his arm in the proper shape, to be thinking about the right angles to be making the throws across the infield. Can he do that now? Yeah, he probably could. But is he going to be at his best doing that now? Or next year, halfway through the year, just making that choice? And by the way, Jimenez is not going anywhere. He's got his contract. Right. They're not going to decide somehow to move on from him. So to me, it just makes too much sense. If you think he's your second baseman, and if you took him first overall, my God, I think you do, then you have to move Jimenez to shortstop starting next year.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I would say June 16th, 2025.
I'm going to write that down. June 2025.
God, I hope I'm like retired and living on an island golfing every day by then. But, all right, I hope I have my putter figured out by then. But I will say, it's weird. It is a little awkward. Like, none of this matters, but, like, if you're Rocchio right now, are you thinking, what does this mean for me? Where am I going? Do I have to go to second base next spring? Am I just keeping the seat warm? Are you trading me? What's going on here?
No, I don't. I actually don't think that he's thinking that at all. I think he's, how do I hold on to this by the fingertips that I've got right now? I really don't think it'd be a different conversation if he was tearing things up.
Of course. I just mean,
then they drafted another middle infielder.
But everybody else, like Martinez, has bounced around and looks pretty comfortable in center, comfortable enough to plunge into the wall every opportunity he can get, even if he brings in the fly ball like before the warning track. You know, Freeman wound up in center field. Schneemann can play everywhere. We haven't seen Rocchio bounce around much. Certainly haven't seen him at second base. It's just an interesting. I'll be very curious to see how this plays out. That's all. But I don't know. The main thing here is, and to kind of tie it back to the beginning, it's why I feel like it's so important for them to make the necessary additions at the trade deadline. I think the lineup, like, next summer, and there's going to be some rookies involved, so you don't want to put too high of expectations on it. But, like, okay, so give me, like, 2026. If you sketch out that lineup, and I don't know if Josh Naylor will be in it, and I know Jose Ramirez will be a little older, but if you're talking about Kwan and DeLotter and Manzardo and Ramirez and Bazzana, maybe Burrito.
Ralphie.
He's probably a little further away than that. But yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. Like, Chorio and Velasquez were just in the futures game.
We'll be having those conversations. You know we'll be having those conversations.
The position player talent in this organization has done an incredible 180. And not all those guys will pan out either. But there is such a bright future for this lineup, which is weird to say about a Cleveland team. And it makes it so that I'm not limiting what I'm looking for if I'm the front office. If the hitter who makes the most sense for you at the trade deadline has multiple years of team control, that's okay. I'm not saying you only need a rental because you've got all these great kids in the pipeline coming. But I do think it's important.
That would be a mistake.
I do think it's important to address the pitching. And whether that means finding a starting pitcher who can just chew up innings so that you survive the 162-game gauntlet here, or it's finding that frontline starter who's signed for multiple years because you don't have as much of that coming in the pipeline. Whatever you got to do, you do it. You have locked in a really bright, promising, not just future, but like immediate future. Beginning next year. Go do what you need to do now to capitalize on this incredible start where you're the best team in the American League in the first half. And then you've got tons of help coming next year and beyond that can, make a big difference. So there's a lot of good things going, but I think it's imperative that the front office doesn't let this season go to waste just because they've got googly eyes at what's coming in the future.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it would be a giant mistake to think too much about that, because if you go back 3 years ago, we're thinking, oh, can you just imagine what this lineup's going to look like when they have Rocchio and Valera and this stuff just doesn't ever play out the way that you just envision. It doesn't work out like that. So when you have a chance, when you're in a position to be the best team in the American League, as they are, I know they're holding on for dear life to that 4.5 games in the division right now because the Twins are playing really well and the Guardians are not. Certainly the last week, really 2 of the last 3 weeks haven't been that great. If you get a chance to get a proven, younger, multi-year controllable hitter, go get it. Go get it. And boy, if you get to a point where it's like, well, I don't know where DeLotter's going to play because 3 guys in this outfield are all-stars. Okay. Okay. Fine. So be it. I will happily cross that. That'll be a bridge I cross with a smile. but there's just no guarantee that it's all going to play out the way that you want.
Have we talked? We can rip on our buddy Dan Hayes a little bit here, right?
What stops us ever?
Dan Twins for Life Hayes. We play our Hardball Dynasty game, and I will never forget the one time. What was it? He like refused to try to acquire an ace level pitcher because he said his rotation only needed a number 5 starter. As if there was a cap to how good a unit of your roster could be. Where it's like, oh, well, we're not going to acquire an outfielder because we have DeLotter. Well, if you can acquire a good outfielder, like you can have both of them.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't think, if I had to guess today, I don't think the Guardians are operating that way, where they're thinking, well, we've got DeLotter, so everything is going to be okay. For all of the things we do rip on the front office and certainly ownership for, when they're in a position to strike with a team that clearly looks like they can make some noise in the postseason, they do it. To their credit, whether it was 16, whether it was 17, and even to some degree in 18, they do it. They go out and they supplement the roster. I think they're going to do it again. We have no idea what it's going to be because the trade market is still shaping up. 2 weeks ago, looked like the Astros could be selling pieces. Now they're clearly buying. Mm-hmm. So it's tough to know today. And if the organization had their choice, certainly they would have already made the move. But you can only do so much when the teams that you're talking to are like, well, we'll let you know in a week and a half where we stand. Because right now we're still teetering on the edge of contention or selling.
Yeah, I would look at the Blue Jays. I'd look at the Tigers, even though they've played well lately. The Nationals. I would look at those teams. I mean, we've spent so much time talking about like what the Rockies and the Athletics and the White Sox have to offer, and everybody knows that, or the Marlins, because those teams have been sellers since like April 3rd. But you
could see a team like the Rays do a little bit of both, too.
Yeah,
I mean,
I was going to say, like, I think
they're in a position like Cleveland.
I think there's going to be a lot of that. That was when I talked to an executive a couple of weeks ago, and he said he had heard a lot of teams that were saying that, we're probably going to do some of both. Like, everybody wants to thread the needle now. The Guardians were the trend-setting seamstress here. But it was a weird week. The Guardians couldn't buy a win, and yet neither could the Orioles. We saw the Yankees have a really rough stretch before they took a series against the Orioles. The Mariners have not played great in the National League. The Dodgers just had a really rough stretch. The Brewers came back to the pack. It felt like the opposite of what you wanted going toward the trade deadline. Like, it's murkier now than it was 2 weeks ago. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see like where the Cubs
get more clarity.
Right, where the Cubs wind up. The NL West, like the Diamondbacks, Padres, and Giants. I can't see the Padres being a seller because of the way they're wired, but will the Giants give up anything? I do worry that it's going to be sort of stagnant just because a lot of these teams are, even if they declare themselves as sellers, they might not want to give up their actual good pieces.
Right. Well, this week was frustrating because you wasted some good pitching. You actually got some good starting pitching, and you weren't able to do anything with it because the offense scuffled. But knowing what you're saying about what this trade market could look like, it's why I still don't remove going to get that offensive piece. Even if we all look at the starting rotation, we say long-term in a playoff series, all that kind of thing, we need to know who's taking the balls in those series. Well, guess what? If you can't go get the starter because they're not readily available, or maybe you can, but they're not that much of a needle mover when it comes to the postseason. They'll help you get there because you need the innings, but once you get to the postseason, I don't even know if it's somebody that I would want starting one of those games. Well, if the best thing you can do is just add to the runs that you can score, then do that. Do something, even if the trade market, because everybody wants the starting pitching, well then fine, do the other thing. Go the other way. Zig where everyone else is zagging and go get the offense and try to outscore everybody 8-7. It's not the ideal way to play, but go do that if that's the only thing that you can do.
In an ideal scenario, you add an ace, you add a mid-rotation innings eater, and you add an impact bat and a reliever. And I'm not naive enough to think that that's possible. So literally just make sure that when 6 p.m. on July 30th passes, you've done something. And not doing something for the sake of doing something, but you can't look yourself in the mirror and say, well, this roster is just can't get better. So you couldn't be positioned, but like this has all aligned perfectly for you to go be aggressive. Like you can't let that opportunity slip. Whatever you have to do. I'm sure there are a lot of years where you can't get exactly what you want. So you have to go to plan B, plan C, plan Q. But that's still better than doing nothing. It's not like there's only one. There's not just one archetype player who's going to fix everything.
Right. You need to be better. When the pencils are down, find a way to have made yourself better, however that is. And there's enough holes in this roster that you can do it. You may have said that the pitching factory looks more like what you get from Temu nowadays, but there's still some smarts, I think, in this organization when it comes to pitching. And yes, when you graduate 3 of your best pitchers to the major league level, the wave, it takes a little bit to fill in again. That's just how that goes. And Logan Allen having his struggles, okay, it's a second-year pitcher. This sort of thing happens. You get back on the horse and you see what you can get out of that guy. All that aside, imagine being a guy like Braylon Doty, and you're a high school arm. You already have some elite. You tell this story all the time about how Bieber was throwing 83, right? And then they finally add some velocity. Well, you get a guy like Doty who already has some pretty good velocity on the fastball. He's, clocking in the mid-90s sometimes. And that's great. And then you're also getting a guy that's a strike thrower, and some have projected maybe he's going to grow a little bit more because he's 18. So that's very well on the table. But just imagine being Doty, and he probably had some idea that the Guardians were going to take him there. I would imagine there's been some discussions there in terms of what sort of deal he would sign to forego going to college. But the Guardians, with the pitching factory, knowing all they've done for pitchers, wouldn't you be over the moon about being selected by the Guardians there?
Yeah, along the same lines, if I'm Chase Burns, I'm thrilled that the Reds took me so that the Rockies couldn't. Right? Like you want to wind up
right. I mean, okay, so I either got to go to the launching pad in Cincinnati, or I got to go to the one that puts me in orbit in Colorado.
Yeah.
Choices.
Yeah, there is some of that. Like, it was interesting listening to Spencer Howard kind of talk about landing with Cleveland, and when the Giants DFA'd him, he was just in limbo for a week, and his agent kind of filled him in on Cleveland and what they do with pitching, and that excited him, that energized him. So I'm sure there's some of the same. It's interesting, like, we're so used to them having a type, and the type is a college pitcher who throws like 91, but has really good command, can throw strikes. And then they take that 91 and make it 93, and they fine-tune the slider and the changeup, and you've got a number 4 starter in the major leagues a couple years later. But then when they take a kid with like really good stuff, like when they drafted Daniel Espino in the first round, and he was already throwing 100 miles an hour, and then I'm thinking like, oh my God, wait, so will he throw 107 when he gets to Akron? Is that how this works? What? Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think we've all kind of gotten to the point of if they take a pitcher that they see some things that they like and they know they can work with, and it's probably a smart pick. And there are a handful of teams that fall into that category. So as an 18-year-old kid, yeah, that would be pretty exciting. I think you're happy with no matter where you end up, I think, when you're that young and you're a top pick. But just sure. Knowing what Cleveland's track record is with pitching, that would certainly energize me.
And it would energize me if I were the Guardians looking at a mid-90s fastball, curveball that's already pretty good, and just thinking about, okay, what other tweaks can we make to the third, fourth, and fifth best pitch to already build on what is already an outstanding foundation with him. I'm going to read you another quote that, again, screamed Guardians pick. This one came from MLB.com in their write-up of him. Doty's athleticism helps him find the strike zone very consistently. Check that box. Especially given his power repertoire. Those who were around him at the area code games also saw plus makeup, a kid who was a sponge for pitching knowledge, something he would take to Oklahoma State should the draft not go his way. A sponge. Excellent makeup. Again, just screams what the Guardians are looking for. Talent, yes, but also a desire to learn and being part of an organization that's eager to teach pitching.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, Antonetti, white lab coat, mixing up the right formula, and it would spit out exactly what you just read.
We often see, they always have the videos inside the war room, the draft war rooms.
Which also,
I mean, hell, they even do it.
Nothing is ever happening in those. It's not a war room. It's just people standing around waiting for the Jimmy John's order to arrive.
They even do this, like when WWE does its draft, and there's like a Raw and SmackDown war room, and then they make the picks, and they all high-five, and it's like, okay. It's not, the high-fiving is not actually about the pick. It's about the whole process culminating. I get it. Like, there's a lot of people in this process, and it's all everybody's ability for 5 seconds to say, hey, thank God we're done, and we got the guy that our process led us to. But imagine that Guardians war room, as we alluded to earlier in this, to get Bazzana, and then to have it play out, and to hopefully have Doty there as well, to pick that guy and be in a position to negotiate and hopefully get that deal done, bring him part of the organization, and then, of course, Kozar, too. You have to feel, again, this could not have played out any better than what they drew up. When you're envisioning what this is going to look like, it had to fall to them exactly the way they would have wanted.
You're the number one pick, and you don't want to be too cute with that. You don't want to, we talked about how, that whole process you're describing, a lot of it is mitigating risk and making sure that you're removing whatever biases would be involved. And it's not as simple as a scout seeing a player on one particular day where they go 4 for 5 with 2 home runs. And so it's like, aha, that's the kid. And then, I mean, I assume that's how it worked in like 1974. And that makes the difference for you. And that's your pick, and there's so much risk involved if that's how you operate. And instead, all these processes and filling in all the information gaps that you can lead you to this. And again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but they've never had the number one pick. They never have like a top 5 pick. So the 1 year where you slip up and you're 76 and 86, and it was a frustrating year for everybody involved, well, it was worth your while because you got the number one pick, and you took a kid who's got a pretty high floor, and you were able to get a pitcher who's really interesting and a catcher who, like Keith Law wrote, could be an everyday catcher. He's got tons of pop. So that was a really good start. And to have that really good start while, oh, by the way, you're sitting in first place in the American League is cherry on top.
Did you see Matthew Dellavedova?
Yeah.
Issued a welcome of sorts to Cleveland. I'm just envisioning that's the start of the faction in WWE between Dellavedova and now Bazzana. But I do enjoy the fact that there are just going to be random Guardians jerseys now, perhaps in Australia, just all over the place.
It's pretty cool. I don't know a ton about Australia. They have an insane amount of big, nasty spiders. Have you ever seen like pictures? There would be like a big field, and it'll look like it snowed, but it's just spider webs.
That sounds like a nightmare.
Terrifying. I just hope I'm never sent there to do a story on Bazzana's upbringing and path to the big leagues, because I don't do spiders.
Well, get ready to speak winking lizard, buddy. Is that where negotiations are going to take place?
They should. How is he going to, they want to learn about him. How are you going to handle the adversity of the fire in the whole wing sauce hitting your lips?
Who's winning the home run derby?
Isn't it going to be Jose? He made it seem like
Let him swing from the left side.
The first time he did it was just a bucket list item. It was for his mom. So him being adamant that he do it again tells me
he's in now.
He's going to win.